Welcome to another episode of We Were Children, a Dilworth School survivors vlog. Today we're going to discuss how Dilworth School covered up the sexual abuse, thus allowing it to continue for 5 decades. First of all, we need to look at why the former management say they never covered up the sexual abuse, and yet the survivors are saying they did. Let's have a look at what the former management say about the abuse at the Dilworth School response to abuse at the Abuse and Care Royal Commission of Inquiry last October.
Allegations of cover-up. I did not receive or uncover any reports of abuse other than those I have mentioned above. I want to state categorically that at no point did I, nor the trustees, nor any Dilworth staff attempt to cover up reports of abuse or turn a blind eye to it.
Now, unfortunately, a number of victims have stated that known abusers were permitted to remain on the staff and that there was a sinister cover-up of sexual abuse within the school. These views may be genuinely held, but they are wrong. No known abuser was ever permitted to remain on the staff, and there was never any sinister cover-up within the school as alleged.
Let me explain. There are 2 different contexts here. In the context of what the former management are saying, they never covered up a specific case of sexual abuse. In the context of what the survivors are saying, they never covered up sexual abuse generally. To properly understand this, you need to understand the school's priorities. Top priority in rule number 1, protect the school's reputation. This is demonstrated by the statement the former Dilworth Trust Board Chair said at the Royal Commission.
One of our trustees during part of this period was a director of the owner of the Herald, and he often used to say to us, whatever we do or don't do, we've got to assume it might end up on the front page of the Herald. He was a flipping director of the publication, and we were constantly vigilant.
Now you understand rule number 1, protect the school's reputation. The management were vigilant and not ending up on the front page of the newspaper. Everything will now make sense of how we ended up where we are today. From what I've been able to depict from my own account and information provided to me over the past 2 years, talking with over 50 survivors, where I've concluded there is 12 forms of cover-up and 2 forms of complacency. Let's run through them. 1. Threatening lawsuits and caning boys who talked about sexual abuse. Not believing reports of sexual abuse. Believing and not acting on reports of sexual abuse. Not investigating properly reports of sexual abuse, covering up the history of sexual abuse, allowing paedophiles to just move on, providing references to paedophiles, not reporting sexual abuse to police, obtaining name suppression of paedophiles, controlling the knowledge of sexual abuse, destroying documents of sexual abuse, the code of silence, not doing background checks when employing staff with no training or experience to supervise children. Most of these forms of cover-up lead back to rule number 1, protect the school's reputation. A few of them, like points 13 and 14, just demonstrate a total lack of common sense. Let's have a closer look at these forms of cover-up and complacency in more detail. 1. Threatening lawsuits or caning boys who talked about sexual abuse. Here we have a clip taken from a TV3 interview of survivor Stephen Gray, who attended Dilworth School in the 70s.
As a 13-year-old, Stephen Gray says he was threatened after asking questions about why 2 teachers had suddenly left the school.
We were called into the headmaster's office and threatened with legal action for slander for daring to bring this up.
Here is Derek Firth, the former chair, confirming at the Royal Commission boys were caned who reported abuse.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I understand 2 boys were caned for reporting abuse.
2. Not believing reports of sexual abuse. Here is a clip taken from the Sunday program. Mark Stelfer tells he reported to the headmaster Pa and wasn't believed.
In fact, as a student, he told the headmaster himself that he was being abused.
The headmaster blamed it on me and then called my mother into the school. Now, at this point, I'm going, hallelujah, this is it. They're going to fire, they're going to expel me. I'm going home. They didn't tell her anything about what had happened. They just told her that I was, misbehaving in such a terrible fashion.
Mark was caned, then, he says, put into Peter Taylor's care.
3. Believing and not acting on reports of sexual abuse. Rodney Ty reported to Headmaster Pa, who believed the complaint and never did anything about it. This clip is taken from episode 2.
Great Barrier Island. When you got back, did you tell anybody about this trip?
I actually told the headmaster at the time, Mr. Parr. He said he'd take care of this, the situation after I told him. And he said for some reason that I had my suspicions, and at that time I was young and I was just not sure exactly what he meant by that.
Oh, okay. And this was roughly 1977, was it, when you made this complaint?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And at any time did Headmaster Pa say to you that your complaint was not believed?
No, he did actually said he'd
Had a
take care of it,
suspicion.
and I believed he knew exactly what I was talking about and what I made the complaint about, which was Galloway and Wilson at the time.
Not investigating properly reports of sexual abuse.
Mistakes were made. As I say in my full submission to the Commission, my deep regret is that the instances reported to me as outlined above were not fully and properly investigated to uncover other instances of abuse at the time. In that respect, our response was inadequate. I fully accept that had the complaints about McIntosh, Wynyard, Cave, GROC3 and Wilson been fully investigated by appropriate experts, their other abuse may well have been revealed then. And possibly the abuse perpetrated by Harlow and Brown may also have come to light as a result of investigations into abuse by these other staff.
Covering up the history of sexual abuse. Let's have a look at the statements about what the management knew about why the paedophiles left the school, and why the same management said in the Dilworth legacy books, which is supposed to be a true reflection of the first 100 years of the school. Remember, Murray Wilton, the former headmaster, was the author of the legacy books, and Derek Firth, the former Trust Board chair, was on the editorial committee. In the preface of the books, Murray Wilton states the editorial committee read every word. Here we have what the former management said about Chaplain Peter Taylor's departure from the school at the Royal Commission.
At the time, the known abuse was of inappropriate touching, and the abuser said he was determined to fight the allegations in court.
And here, Derek, we're referring to the first chaplain.
Yes,
that's how we refer to that person.
Yes, yes.
This is what the legacy books say about Chaplain Peter Taylor's departure from the school.
In November 1978, the chaplain P.J. Taylor resigned and left the school immediately after a period when, as Pa reported to the board, he appeared to be getting offside with most of the boys.
Here is what they said about Rex McIntosh's departure from the school.
McIntosh was reported to me for showering naked with the boys.
This is what the legacy books say about Rex McIntosh's departure from the school.
Staff changes. The new school year in 1980 began without R.C. McIntosh, who did not return after his leave of absence. His place as McMurray housemaster was taken by R.H. Wynyard.
Here is what they said about Ian Wilson's departure from the school.
Ian Wilson, 1996. Report was first made to me on the 17th of July, 1996, by an old boy victim of abuse which had occurred apparently in the 1970s.
This is what the legacy books say about Ian Wilson's departure from the school.
One unexpected change at the end of 1996 was the resignation of the senior master, I.R. Wilson. Since 1971, when he joined the Dilworth staff as a house tutor and subsequently became a teacher in 1975, Ian Wilson's name had been synonymous with board administration, pastoral care, imaginative teaching and enthusiastic sports coaching. His departure was a serious setback at a time when senior management stability during the change in leadership was crucial.
Here is what they said about Leonard Cave's departure from the school.
Leonard Cave, June 1985, reported to me for providing alcohol and inappropriate touching of one boy.
This is what the legacy books say about Leonard Cave's departure from the school.
Disharmony. The excitement of the DBC opening was tempered by the unexpected resignation in May 1985 of Leonard Cave. He had been a loyal, hard-working member of the staff, and his loss was keenly felt, especially as the music centre, in the planning of which he had played a major role, was almost completed and about to be opened.
Here is what they said about Chaplain Ross Brown's departure from the school.
Chaplain Ross Brown was made to resign in March 2006 for inappropriately encouraging boys to masturbate in class.
This is what the legacy books say about Chaplain Ross Brown's departure from the school.
Retirement of Chaplain. After a tenure of 26 years, far exceeding the longevity of all his predecessors and most school chaplains, Father Ross Brown retired at the beginning of 2006. His contribution to the spiritual, pastoral and cultural life of the school was very significant. He continues his radio work and awaits the outcome of several applications for a new position in the church.
6. Allowing paedophiles to just move on. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
Yes, but it's still, I mean, we've had a trend of persons who've been accused of abuse, not just at Dilworth and a lot of other institutions where the option of a resignation and moving on happens rather than a formal disciplinary process. And that's what's happened here, isn't it?
But we were advised that he had not committed an offence for which he could be summarily dismissed. Now, I'm far from confident that was the right advice, and I said so at the time to our advisor, but that was the advice.
7. Providing references for paedophiles. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
So just that last sentence, last paragraph, he's left behind a heritage of fine music and has also left his stamp on the new music facility. He will be sorely missed at the school, but I fully recognise that, having spent almost his entire career at Dilworth, he is due for a change and a new challenge. I wish him well in his search for a new position and commend him enthusiastically to prospective employers. Do you think that it was a responsible step to take to provide that comment in the reference for Mr. Cave?
In retrospect, with the knowledge of hindsight, no, I wish I could have withdrawn it.
8. Not reporting abuse to police. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
A boy that was inebriated and then one of the staff was inappropriately touching them, that's That's sexual abuse, isn't it?
Certainly it is.
And again, there's a trust board decision to ask him to resign and not to report that to police.
The trust board certainly made the final decision in these matters. It was not my prerogative to do that.
9. Obtaining name suppression of paedophiles. Let's have a chat to Steve Brown about this. Hey Steve, welcome back to the We Were Children channel.
Thanks, Greg.
Steve, how would you define cover-up?
Probably the best definition of cover-up is one I've got from New Zealand lawyer Kevin Ryan. He offered these insights. They are the domain of those who know they're not doing a proper job. Those doing them feel justified in covering up matters that are not beneficial to their reputation. They usually happen in larger organisations, and they are the malignant tumour which protects a small part of the organisation while threatening the health of the whole. I'd like to add to that and say that the act of omission, or the act of not telling the whole truth, is also a cover-up, because it is in essence a lie.
Okay, Steve. How many times did Dilworth School apply to the courts for name suppression orders when Dilworth paedophiles were up on charges before the courts?
From the evidence that I've got and seen, every time that a Dilworth staff member or former staff member was charged, Dilworth went for permanent non-publication order preventing its name or any identifying particulars being published. And that happened right up to the time of Operation Beverley. Prior to that, there is no case where Dilworth was named in a paper as far as I know.
Steve, when Dilworth applied to the court for name suppression, do you have any examples of what they wrote to the court?
Probably the best examples that we've got are written by Donald McLean, who was the then principal of Dilworth, and when he wrote these, he stated that he was a representative of the Dilworth Trust Board, and he gave 4 points. He said Dilworth is seeking for a permanent non-publication order preventing its name and any identifying particulars from being published. I consider that the publication of the name of Dilworth or any identifying particulars would cause undue hardship to Dilworth and the current and past pupils and the families of those pupils. I also consider that such publication would cause considerable damage to the reputation of the school. Publication of the offending may discourage future parents and families from applying for enrolment at Dilworth. I'm also concerned that the reputation of Dilworth will be detrimentally impacted by the publication, And those statements were written by McLean in an affidavit dated the 29th of April 2014.
Steve, is there anyone on the trust board today who was on the trust board at the time when name suppression orders were sought by the trust board?
Yes, there is one person that's still on the trust board, and his name is, and he's an old boy, is Aaron Snodgrass.
Ah, Aaron Snodgrass, the current Dilworth Trust Board chair.
That's correct.
Well, thank you, Steve, for coming on the channel today. Gratefully appreciated.
You're welcome, Greg.
Dilworth requesting from the court's name suppression orders of the paedophiles denied survivors justice. This is covered in more detail in episode 4. So McLean's affidavit dated 29th of April 2014 stated publication of the offending may discourage future parents and families from applying for enrolment at Dilworth. This denied the public the knowledge to make an informed decision about enrolling their child into Dilworth. How many children would never have gone to Dilworth had the prosecutions been made public? And of those children that would never have gone, how many of them ended up being victims of abuse? We will never know the answer to that question. 10. Controlling the knowledge of the abuse. Peter Taylor provided Dilworth with a list of the victims he abused. This was covered by Derek Firth at the Royal Commission.
Derek, in terms of a comment that you've made in an email in 2021 that you provided professional counselling to the boys in relation to this complaints in relation to the chaplain, and is it your recollection that that was counselling to the two boys who'd come forward? It's not to be interpreted as you provided counselling generally to boys who might have been harmed by this chaplain at the school.
Well, we asked Peter Parr to arrange counselling for boys who had been molested by this chaplain.
But you didn't have a wide investigation to find out how many, did you? So you were
Yes,
just dealing with those
yes,
that had come forward.
At the time, he told us who the boys were, but I cannot remember now how many.
Survivors say Headmaster Parr and other representatives of Dilworth visited the victims' parents, providing an explanation and insurance in order to keep the lid on the abuse. Mark Stelford talks about this in an interview on the platform with Leanne Malcolm.
So there are these bizarre stories about a boy reporting it and then home on the holidays and the headmaster knocking on the door and sitting down with the mother and saying to the mother, you know, he's telling lies. We've got to be careful, otherwise we're not going to be able to keep him at school. And, you know, you're going to be buying school uniforms and hockey sticks from now on.
I'm sure there will be more detail about this in the upcoming Dilworth Independent Inquiry report. 11. Deliberately destroying documents of sexual abuse. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
And there's a reference in the documents, isn't there? That I think you've seen that in around 92 or 93, the documents relating to that investigation might have been destroyed in some document clean-up process. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do. It's my understanding. I knew nothing about it at the time. It was something that occurred later. It wasn't the school records, it was the trust board records.
And we don't have records of that investigation, do we? Because it appears that those, as you would have heard in the discussion with Mr. Wilton yesterday, there's a document recording that in 92 or 93 the documents were destroyed in a clean-out.
Yes.
I'm sure these documents, which were conveniently destroyed, would have told us in detail the complaints which were made regarding Chaplain Peter Taylor. The Code of Silence. This was called pimping. If you pimped on a fellow student, you would have made yourself a bully target for your peers and seniors for the rest of your time at Dilworth. The Code of Silence is acknowledged in the Dilworth legacy books, and we know it existed as far back as the 50s. As an old boy has been a trustee on the Dilworth Trust Board for the past 6 decades, the school management have always known about the Code of Silence. The Code of Silence supported the narrative. No action was ever taken to change the Code of Silence because it supported rule number 1, protect the school's reputation. So this too was used as a form of cover-up. 13. Not doing background checks when employing staff. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
Glowing communication relating to the chaplain before he came to the school, but you later found out that there'd been allegations that he'd abused others in a different place before he came to Dilworth. Do you recall that?
Yes.
14. Employing staff with no training or experience. Employing staff with no training or experience to supervise children. Let's have a look at what the former management said about this at the Royal Commission.
Well, first of all, I need to explain that the house tutors were young men with no training or experience in dealing with young people, and they may well have come from a background themselves of violence in the schools that they attended and assumed that that was the way to deal with it at Dilworth.
Now, there is a major point of contention between the former management of the school and survivors. The former management are saying regarding the chaplain Peter Taylor that only inappropriate touching was reported to Headmaster Parr.
I specifically asked Mr. Parr if there were any allegations involving penetration or oral sex, and he specifically asked that of what he's told me, that he asked that of the complainants and that there were none.
The survivors are saying that rape and forced oral sex was reported to Parr. Mark Stelfer reported his abuse to the then Headmaster Parr. Here is what he had to say on the Sunday program.
This is a hard question, but what did Peter Taylor do to you?
It began with, him touching and grooming me and, trying to kiss me. And although I can't really talk about it here, otherwise I'll probably fall apart, it accelerated quickly into rape.
He'd do it, says Mark, here, the altar of the school chapel.
There's such a feeling of humiliation when it comes down to it, that I kind of blanked it out and just thought, surely that's it. I'm initiated now. I'm a Christian. It won't happen again. But of course it did happen again and again and again.
I have spoken to another survivor that says he reported forced oral sex, and the same day he made the report, Chaplain Peter Taylor was removed from the school. When Chaplain Taylor was caught, he provided a list of names of the boys who had abused. We believe there was 10 names on that list, so does it make sense that prior to being caught, he raped Mark Stelfer for 18 months and had forced oral sex with another boy, that the 10 names on the list, that all they reported was inappropriate touching? Had a report been made to police of rape and forced oral sex, and the list of victims was provided to police that Taylor provided Headmaster Parr, this would have prompted a full-blown police investigation. Police would have insisted on interviewing every student in the school in case there were more victims. There is a high probability this investigation would have uncovered the other paedophiles that were operating at the school at that time, who were Rex McIntosh, Ian Wilson, Leonard Cave, Graham Lindsay, Keith Dixon, Richard Galloway, Howard Wynyard, plus another 4 tutors. With multiple prosecutions, this would have ended up on the front page of the newspaper and on national television at that time, prompting change and providing prevention, where Peter Taylor's replacement, Chaplain Ross Brown, who may have thought twice about abusing boys, seen all the convictions taking place when he started, rather than him hearing his predecessor was just allowed to move on. This full-blown police investigation happening when they caught Chaplain Peter Taylor and others of the time may have ended up preventing hundreds of boys from being sexually abused after this event. This contentious point is bound to come out in the independent inquiry report in the next few months. Because there were at least 12 pedophiles operating at the school at the same time in the late 70s, when a victim reported sexual abuse, because it was personal, he probably reported it to the person he felt most comfortable with, like the chaplain, housemaster, scoutmaster, house tutor. There was a high probability that a report was made to another pedophile where the sexual abuse complaint went no further. This is shown with Ian Wilson's statement in court, where he says sexual abuse was normalised. That statement demonstrates he knew about the other pedophiles at the school. Prevention. What stops people just going down to their local bank and helping themselves to some cash? It's the threat of prosecution and being locked up in jail. This is known as prevention. Because of the 12 forms of cover-up we just covered, this provided no prevention to pedophilia at the school. Not reporting to police, allowing pedophiles to just move on, sometimes with gratuitous payment, and sometimes even with a reference, getting name suppression for pedophiles and covering up the knowledge and history of sexual abuse. What prevention message does that send to the other pedophiles who were operating at the school at that time? When they allowed the chaplain, Peter Taylor, to just move on and not reporting to police, what message did that send to Rex McIntosh, Ian Wilson, Leonard Cave, Graham Lindsay, Keith Dixon, Richard Galloway, Howard Wynyard, plus 4 other tutors? And of course, Peter Taylor's replacement, Chaplain Ross Brown. They would have learnt that the worst that can happen to them if they were caught sexually abusing boys was to be asked to resign, paid a gratuitous payment, and if they were lucky, provided with a reference as well, and if they went to court, provided with name suppression. This process the management of the time decided was best practice provided absolutely no prevention to sexual abusing at the school. Employing staff with no training or experience to supervise children. You put a cane in the hands of these staff who were able to issue corporal punishment to boys without witness or consultation to management. Dilworth ignored the survey by the Education Department regarding corporal punishment. Where 1,048 schools were surveyed in 1972, it was found that most schools had adopted a corporal punishment policy. The general pattern of practice was to have a witness present. By not following safety procedures of having a witness that the public schools adopted, and employing staff with no experience in training and not providing training on corporal punishment is why boys were caned for no reason, the wrong reasons, or in some cases sexually assaulted and tortured by pedophiles. You employed staff to work with hundreds of children without doing background checks. You did background checks after Chaplain Peter Taylor was caught and found he had prior accusations of sexual abuse, which means you could have found out about this information before you employed Chaplain Peter Taylor. So what laws were around back in the 70s to protect children from abuse and care?
Section 195 of the Crimes Act 1961, back in the 70s, was called cruelty to a child. Everyone is liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years, who having the custody, control, or charge of any child under the age of 16 years, wilfully ill-treats or neglects the child, or wilfully causes or permits the child to be ill-treated in a manner likely to cause him unnecessary suffering, actual bodily harm, injury to health, or any mental disorder or disability.
Permits the child to be ill-treated. Section 195 is not time-barred, so anyone can be prosecuted today for events that happened back in the 70s. Failure to do staff background checks to protect the children in your care, employing staff with no training or experience, failure to provide any prevention to sexual abuse and not reporting sexual abuse to police could mean the school permitted children to be ill-treated under Section 195. Because there was no prevention to sexual abuse provided at Dilworth School is why we're here today with over 30 pedophiles, over 200 victims, and it could be as many as 20 to 30 suicides over these 5 decades of abuse. The big question survivors, families and the New Zealand public need to ask is it just okay for Dilworth to pay the survivors redress? Or should some action be taken against the school and or its past and present management? Should the current structure of the Dilworth Trust Board change to perhaps just 3 hard-nosed businessmen, then a trustee from education, 1 psychologist and 1 survivor to give the Trust Board some heart? Or perhaps 2 trust boards, one making the money and the other one running the school? I'll leave that thought with you. Some things that Dilworth needs to change is uplifting the name suppression orders obtained by Dilworth that are still in force. The Dilworth legacy books need a revision to reflect the truth about the first 100 years of the school. These horrific events and mistakes need to be acknowledged in the school's history, and only then can everyone concerned begin to heal. A reward needs to be posted to help locate and return from China Owen Grant workmen a former Dilworth music teacher who the New Zealand police have an outstanding warrant for his arrest. Please subscribe to this channel so I can let you know about the next episode. Thank you for watching.
If Isabella Dilworth was alive today, she would be